Hey, 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 what's been good about your day? It's Mrs. Newport. It's time for story time. We are over halfway through Heaven Changes Everything by Todd and Sonia Burpo. Not sure why I'm tongue-tied today. So I am loving this book. I hope you are too. It's awesome how God helps us through challenging times, kind of like what we're going through these days. So chapter 24 is where we're going to start today, and it's called Imagine Being Held by Jesus. Won't that be awesome when we get to do that? My little boy nodded as though reporting nothing more remarkable than seeing a ladybug in the front yard. Yeah, Jesus was there. Well, where was Jesus? Colton looked me right in the eye. I was sitting in Jesus' lap. Todd says, it's no surprise to me that Colton's first memory of his trip to heaven is when he was sitting on Jesus' lap. Can you even imagine what that would have been like for him, going from a harsh, terrifying hospital operating room in the lap of the Son of God? Picture those times when a young child or even a pet has run to you in terror, wanting to be protected from some scary thing. Safely nestled in your arms, the little one turns back and looks at the beast, and suddenly fear is replaced by curiosity and security. That's the kind of memory Colton must have had in heaven tenfold. What a blessing. But for me, the image of my little boy sitting in Jesus' lap brings mixed feelings. I love knowing Jesus welcomed my son into the safety of his arms, but at the same time, I remember where I was while Colton was sitting in Jesus' lap. I was hiding out in that empty hospital room, raging at God for bringing my son so close to death, furious at the very one who, at that moment, unknown to me, was holding my son in his arms. Quite a contrast, isn't it? I'd like to tell you that since I found out what was going on while I was having my pity party meltdown, I no longer rant and rave at God when things go wrong. But that wouldn't be true. I still get frustrated and I get mad, but now I get mad at the circumstances and not at God. Sure, I still cry out to God to intervene in those hard circumstances. He expects me to ask Him to help my family and my friends be safe. But at the same time, I try to remember that God has a plan for my life, a plan that ends in heaven. And whatever is happening to me right now is part of that plan. Yes, I still get frustrated. I want to know how my current difficulty fits into God's big picture. It would make things so much easier to endure the challenge at hand, wouldn't it? But God's ways are not our ways. And until it's my turn to sit in Jesus' lap and feel that unimaginable peace and security, I'm trying to live my life with that image in mind. People have asked Colton, when you saw Satan, weren't you afraid? And he answers, well, Satan is scary, but I wasn't afraid. Jesus was just showing me an image of Satan. It's not like he was right there. Colton knew he was seeing just an image, not Satan himself. He explains that and then adds, besides, Jesus was standing next to me. You're not afraid when he's right there. So imagine yourself, whenever hard times hit, climbing into Jesus' lap and turning back to look at the things that have caused you pain or fear. I'll bet those things won't look so scary there. We're going to end this chapter with Mark 10:16. It says, he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. Let's go into chapter 25 called Connecting Through Loss. Then, 2 months into the pregnancy, Sonia lost the baby, and our misty-edged dreams popped like soap bubbles. Grief consumed Sonia. The reality of a child lost, one we would never know, an empty space where there wasn't one before. So Sonia's talking in this chapter. She says, I miscarried 2 months into my second pregnancy on June 20th, 1998, Father's Day weekend. We hadn't told many people I was pregnant, thank goodness, so very few people had to be told of our loss. There didn't seem to be any sense in announcing it. Besides, I certainly didn't feel like talking about it. As a result, only a handful of people knew it had even happened. We kept the miscarriage mostly to ourselves. That Father's Day weekend, when it became obvious what was going on, I curled up into the fetal position, laid on our bed, and wept. I wanted to stay there forever, giving into my grief and letting my family and the rest of the world go on without me. Yes, I knew Todd was hurting too. Yes, I knew our almost 2-year-old Cassie needed her mommy. But that day, I couldn't seem to get through any of my own grief to think about anyone else but myself and the baby I'd lost. One of the hardest things about a miscarriage is just that. Few people know or understand the grief that accompanies it. Many are quick to shrug it off, pat you on the shoulder and say, "You'll be okay. You can always have another one." People can easily understand the enormous loss parents feel when a child dies after being born, and it's harder for the most to grasp the lost parents feel when they suffer a miscarriage. Todd and I had probably never understood ourselves how much emotional pain a miscarriage can cause until we experienced it firsthand. And as hard as it is for prospective dads, there's an extra dimension of pain for the moms because they can't help but wonder what if they did something to cause it. I certainly felt that way. I had tried to keep myself and the baby as healthy as I knew how, but something had gone terribly wrong, and I blamed myself for the baby's death. I prayed, asking God to forgive me for it, whatever it was. And I asked God, why? Why had our baby died? I believe God is sovereign. I don't doubt that He has a bigger plan for my life than I know on this side of heaven. But that weekend, it didn't really ease the pain of my loss to think that God had a reason for letting my baby die. Todd and I told ourselves God needed our baby for some other purpose than being our child. Frankly, we didn't like that. Not one bit, but we accepted that belief. A few months later, when I became pregnant with Colton, we were ecstatic. But we were also scared, worrying that I would miscarry again. But when he was born healthy, the joy and the relief were indescribable. Time passed, and as it happens with most grief, our sorrow eased. But it never went away, not by a long shot. Then, when Colton's appendix ruptured and it seemed that we were going to lose him too, all that old grief came rushing back, along with the new terror that our son would die too. It was so hard to understand how such pain and distress could be part of God's plan. And then came the day, 7 months after Colton's discharge from the hospital, that he told us that he had 2 sisters, Cassie and the sister who ran up to greet him when he visited heaven. We were dumbfounded and then comforted, so comforted that we knew we had to share what had happened. And in that sharing, we began to see God's plan. When a couple in our church endured a miscarriage, we reached out to them. We invited them into our home and shared their grief as only those who have experienced it can do. We cried with them and prayed with them. Then we told them what we believed. The baby we miscarried is in heaven. Colton saw her. That means your child is there too, we told them. And someday you're going to see him or her. Over the years, we've walked through the grief of miscarriage with 3 other couples, and we've seen the impact our story has had on them. One of the moms told me, "Sonia, the one thing that helps me is knowing Colton saw his sister in heaven, so I know my baby is okay. It's tough now, but we're going to get through this because we have that hope that we'll see our child someday too." We didn't bring that couple's baby back, but we journeyed through the freshest part of their grief with them and gave them hope. We also learned how powerful our story could be in helping others. To put it simply, that's why we wrote Heaven is for Real. Todd points out that when Jesus was urgently called to the home of his dying friend Lazarus, the Lord hung back for a few days. Lazarus and his 2 sisters were Jesus' friends, and they were also believers. They knew Jesus could save Lazarus from death, but Jesus didn't go, and Lazarus died. Still, the Lord waited. Amazingly, he told his disciples, "I am glad for your sakes that I wasn't there." The disciples were confused. How could Jesus possibly be glad that his friend had died? He told them, "You're about to be given new grounds for believing." You see, God doesn't do anything without a bigger purpose than we can imagine. But because we can't even begin to imagine it, we sometimes end up stuck in feelings of hurt and confusion. Finally, after 4 days, Jesus and his disciples went to his friend's home. And what did Jesus do when he got to that sad place where Lazarus' sisters and their friends were mourning his death? Jesus wept. That's right. He cried right along with his heartbroken friends. At that point, his disciples were probably really confused. After all, Jesus had told them he was glad Lazarus died. He had said he was going to use Lazarus' death to give them new grounds for believing, and yet there he was, weeping. That's the kind of confusion you feel when you're a believer and God lets something happen that turns your world upside down and breaks your heart. It's what happened to us when I miscarried. Then it happened again when Colton almost died. When you're that hurt and confused, you can end up curled up in that fetal position, so grief-stricken you cannot function, or in a closed-off hospital room, railing at God while your little boy undergoes emergency surgery with no assurance he'll live through it. You think, this isn't fair, Lord. We're following you. Why are you letting this happen to us? But that's when we need to remember Jesus' words. He may be using our difficult situation to provide new grounds for believing. After all, what did Jesus do in front of Lazarus' tomb? He called to him, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus did. Do you think any people in the crowd of friends and neighbors standing around the tomb might have become believers that day? Of course they did. There are things God allows to happen because he knows the outcome is going to be greater than anything we could ever do on our own. I've been criticized for saying God needed my unborn baby. But how can anyone look at the outcome and not believe that? I would never want to go through another miscarriage, ever. But we've heard from hundreds, maybe thousands of people who have lost a child and who are now finding peace because they believe that child is in heaven and they will see him or her someday. It's the part of Colton's story that connected us most powerfully with hurting people around the world. When I'm speaking somewhere in a women's group, I know that sharing our miscarriage experience is the thing that will be most closely connect my heart with the hearts of many women in the audience. As a matter of fact, I have to brace myself in that reaction I've learned to expect. It's a subconscious reaction of hurt and heartache. And when I see it on a woman's face, I feel an instant connection, my heart to hers, sensing without asking that she too has lost a child. Most recently, I saw that reaction during a tour of speaking appearances in the Midwest. If you were in one of those audiences, I want you to know I saw you. Maybe you were the woman with the gray sweater, or the lady wearing the pretty scarf, or the older lady dabbing her eyes with the tissue. I saw the pain in your faces as we shared the hurt in our hearts. My prayer is that sharing Colton's story, I can assure these women and all parents who have lost a child that they will see their little one again. Heaven is for real, and if my baby is there, so is yours. Everywhere we go, Todd and I tell people that giving people this kind of hope is why we wrote the book. It's why we do what we do. Couples have miscarried still seek out Todd for counseling. They know he understands because we've been where they are. We know how bad it hurts. But now we have something else to share with them besides their grief. Now we have hope. Don't ever forget, Jesus controls life's outcomes. The greatest outcome might be one that only he can see today, but you will one day be able to see it too. Heaven is waiting. I'm going to leave you with Romans 8:26 and 28. It says, "The Spirit also helps in our weaknesses, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." I hope you find comfort and peace today if you're hurting, and just let me know if you need me to pray for you.